Hey everyone, Daljeet here from astrolab21.com. Very crazy. I was just sitting down to record this video about the eclipse coming up, the 2024 full solar eclipse that we're going to have in a few days. And one of the subjects and one of the themes that comes up with eclipses and some of the other transits that we're having with Jupiter conjoining Uranus and Taurus is the idea of earthquakes. It's a theme associated with some of these archetypal constellations, and I shit you not, right before I hit record about 5 minutes ago, my entire house just shook for about 5 to 7 seconds. And I'm here in northwest Connecticut on the East Coast, not a very notoriously seismically active part of our country. But it was a pretty good one. It hasn't even been recorded yet. I just confirmed with one of my neighbors and one of the local town Facebook groups that everyone felt it in the area. And even as someone coming who has lived in California for 30 years, was surprised at the intensity of it. So the level of synchronicity going on these days is just freaking phenomenal, isn't it? So anyway, that's a little preface to this video. This is one of the things that I'm truly just fascinated with about the pseudoscience of astrology. And anyway, let's talk about the astrological weather, and the reason why I think I said earlier in the year that we're entering into this period of time where it's sort of the most interesting part of the year astrologically with some of the transits we're having. And of course, the upcoming solar eclipse, I guess unless you've been living under a rock here in the United States, I'm sure you know it's coming. Really fascinating, actually, the kind of fervor around this eclipse. The path of its totality goes straight across the heart of America. So there's a lot of people who will have the opportunity to see this full eclipse. And it is, in ways, these are kind of once in a lifetime opportunities to be in a part of the planet where a full or total eclipse is taking place, and to witness that event, that astronomical event. And it's also an astrological event, of course. But yeah, the insanity around it is something to behold. There are some states across the heartland of America where they're declaring like states of emergency. They're preparing for a crazy mass of people descending on small towns along the ecliptic path. And I think some states are talking about bringing in the National Guard for support. So, I guess as an astrologer, we astrologers are always very sensitive and alert to the eclipse cycles and the eclipse seasons. And when we get one where we're going to get a full eclipse, they are significant. As I said, one of the significations of eclipses is earthquakes. And as I'm going to show you in this presentation, and I swear to God, I've been putting this presentation together for the last few days, and just to sit down and to record it and to have an earthquake occur as I'm about to record this video, you can't make this shit up. So anyway, I'm going to throw a slide presentation together here, and we'll look at the chart for the eclipse and for some of the other significant astrological transits that we have. This is going to be a really intense time, and I think we're already in the orb of this experience. If you've been feeling crazy energy for the last week or so leading up to this eclipse, and it's going to obviously take us through the entire eclipse season, right? An eclipse, we get 2 a year, so we're having this one in Aries season. We'll have it again in Libra season around the fall equinox. So these are occurring close to the equinox, spring and fall. And the effects of this eclipse will reverberate throughout the next 6 months. So it's an important one to observe. There's also a very specific, as we'll see, alignment with Chiron with this eclipse, which I think symbolically and with the exactitude, as we'll see, it's really something to contemplate in terms of the powerful effect that this eclipse is going to have on the collective consciousness, as well as each of us as individuals. So, without further ado, we'll just jump into this presentation. 2024 eclipse, and I've got this image here. I've been playing with some AI generated images. I use those for some of the art for my articles that I write, my monthly article on Medium. And it's just sort of funny. I use a free version, so I don't get to tweak the prompt very much. And sometimes I just have to kind of take what it gives me. But this one I thought was very ironic in terms of, the eclipse is sort of behind all these people, and they're all staring off into the sky with their special glasses on. And it just made me chuckle when the image was generated. And it made me think about, Plato's allegory of the cave, right? Where everyone's looking at the reflection perhaps on the cave wall when the real world is happening behind them, so to speak. And in some ways it is a metaphor for the collective response to this upcoming eclipse, and where there will be hordes of people gathering in places along the path with their glasses on and their cell phone and their cameras out and taking pictures of it, while the real magic, if you will, is happening at a much deeper level, which is the astrological level, the archetypal level, the symbolic level, if you will. So I thought that was just an interesting illustration, anyway, to sort of set the tone for this presentation. But here, one of the reasons why this eclipse is really fascinating is that it's crossing paths with the last full eclipse that we had in America, which was back in August of 2017. And that time the eclipse path went from the Pacific Northwest down through the south. And here is a map showing the eclipse path of this upcoming 2024 eclipse, which will kind of come from the south through Mexico and then up into the northeast. So it's very interesting that there's this place where these two ecliptic paths intersect, which marks in sort of an X right in the heartland of America, right? What we call the Midwest, in these areas around Kansas and Illinois and Tennessee. Very interesting. And what's interesting about this area is that it is a seismically active part of the continent, which I wasn't really as aware of. I mean, as someone who lived and spent half my life in Los Angeles in one of the epicenters, I was very aware of the San Andreas Fault and all of the seismic activity. I've experienced my share of earthquakes living in LA for a better part of 20 years. But just wasn't aware that this part of the country is probably the second most seismically active in the United States. And it's interesting, if you think about that graph I just showed you with the two ecliptic paths, they actually mimic quite eerily the two major fault lines that do run across the continent here. And this area that I was highlighting, where both of these major fault lines intersect, is what's known as the New Madrid Seismic Zone. And there were some great quakes back in the early 1800s. 1811 and 12 were three fairly significant earthquakes. Off here, they can't barely see it here. Back in the 1600s, there was a 7.9 up here in what is now, I believe, Quebec area of Canada. But interestingly, in 1895, in this New Madrid zone, there was a 6.8 earthquake that was as you can see by this graph, fairly sizable, and the effects felt far and wide here. And by comparison, the 94 earthquake in Los Angeles, the Northridge quake, which did a ton of damage, was a 6.7. And you can see the sort of magnitude of its effects throughout all of Southern California. But if you consider this one in 1895, almost exactly a century earlier, it's just interesting to comprehend the potential here, where we have for this this area of seismic activity. So kind of crazy. I mean, of course, we just had a pretty massive earthquake. We had that 7.4 in Taiwan just a few days ago, and I'm sure everyone's probably seen this image by now, but gosh, so fortunate that there was, for such a massive earthquake, to have so little loss of life for that event. I think it's under 20 people at this point that have been found or pronounced dead. So, there were tsunami concerns, and obviously, memories of Fukushima, sort of who haunt many of us, were present. So just crazy to consider, this as a potential for, coincidence. I'm not saying, do eclipses cause earthquakes? Is there a mechanism there? Now, something that is of great interest is, and again, you can't write this stuff. As I was doing some research on this, I learned that NASA is actually going to fire rockets into the atmosphere at the eclipse, at the moment of the eclipse. Right? I've got an article here from space.com. NASA will launch rockets into the total solar eclipse. Not only that, but NASA's calling this their Atmospheric Perturbations Around Eclipse Path mission, with the acronym APEP. And what is APEP? That is the name of the Egyptian god of darkness and enemy of the sun god Ra. And so why would NASA use an acronym related to Egyptian mythology and the darkness, the Lord of Darkness, the enemy of the sun god Ra during an eclipse, right? And you think, are they just having fun, or is there something a little deeper going on there? And of course, as an astrologer, I'm always just fascinated by these kinds of things that percolate in the culture. And it was a little shocking to me, to be honest, with all the craziness around this eclipse in our culture, that NASA would be firing a rocket at the eclipse. Of course, they're testing the ionosphere to see what effect it has on temperature. There's some valid scientific data to be culled from this experiment, but it just strikes me as really odd. And an acronym, and using the name of an Egyptian god. I think I have here, an image of Ra versus Apep. Just the mythology and the, as I said, astrology is dismissed as a pseudoscience. It is a false science by definition. Yet it's always fascinating when real science, and it doesn't get more real than NASA, decides to use mythological language. And of course, all the names of the planets and the asteroids, they all have these mythological connections. And it's so fascinating how many times the archetype and the mythology matches up with the actual effects of the transiting planets for which they are named, or bodies. So again, file under, you can't write this shit, right? So we've got, Ra versus APEP here, and NASA is involved. I did do a little thing on the earthquake. I'm just going to refresh this and see if there's anything new in the news. There is not. So interesting to note. But anyway, the one in Taiwan was very significant. So we are in a time of seismic activity, or course, I was texting with my neighbor and asked him if he felt that, and he said, yeah, and he had just come back from a trip to New Zealand, and he's like, yeah, they had earthquakes there almost every day while he was there. So we're in a period of great seismic activity, connected to the eclipse, connected to the transits of Uranus and Jupiter and Taurus. I don't know. Interesting to comprehend and to contemplate, if you will. So we'll take a look at the charts here for this period that we're going into. So one thing that's interesting to note, just looking at the chart right now, how all the planets, starting with Pluto and Aquarius, all the way through Uranus and Taurus, are all in one area of the sky. And essentially, I have the Earth here kind of all alone in our own half of the solar system. There's a cool way of visualizing this. I'm using one of my favorite apps here, which is Solar System Scope. And if we kind of zoom out, it's kind of the case where everyone else is kind of dancing over here. As I said, we got Pluto out here in Aquarius, Neptune in Pisces, and then from our perspective, there's Jupiter and Uranus hanging out in Taurus. But other than Mercury, we're the only planetary bodies on this side of the sun during this eclipse, which is going to take place here in Aries, over in this part of the sky. In a few more days' time, the moon will have moved to that exact position where the eclipse will take place. So just a pretty interesting thing to contemplate, sort of astrophysically, in terms of kind of going it alone in our part of the sky at this time. And I think adds to the significance of this eclipse and this sort of time frame that we're moving through. So something interesting to observe, and a couple of significant things we'll talk about. We've got the Pluto ingress into Aquarius, and this is the second time we've had that, right? Where this occurred for the first time last year in the spring of 2023, where we had the first ingress of Pluto into Aquarius. And it was interesting at that time. It occurred at the exact same time as the whole ChatGPT phenomenon just exploded into this sort of collective consciousness. It was like suddenly AI was everywhere, ChatGPT was going to change the world, and everyone was freaking out about it. Perfectly synchronous with Pluto entering into Aquarius, I thought was interesting. And then it retrograded back out, went back into Capricorn for the second half of 2023, and there was much sort of hand-wringing and consternation about how do we control it, how do we regulate it, should governments step in? Very Capricornian themes, right? And now it's moved in again, and almost again synchronous with its movement back into Aquarius. OpenAI and Sora, they did the first video, artificially created video, which just blew everyone away, and everyone started freaking out again. And obviously it's likely that AI will play some role in the upcoming U.S. presidential elections in terms of misinformation and deep fakes and, all kinds of chaos that could be created with the malicious use of this technology. So interesting to look at Pluto's ingress into Aquarius. And also, as you know, I've been folding in human design into my practice as well, and so it's also interesting to look at it in parallel with the astrology. And if we jump over to a look at a human design chart, here is the current transit, and we have Pluto in the 60th gate. And this is something that is really interesting to me about human design as it interacts or interfaces or integrates with astrology. And something that was sort of challenging to me as I came to it for the first time was that, some of these gates align in a way that they overlap two signs. For instance, gate 60 part of it is in Capricorn, part of it is in Aquarius. So I thought it was interesting as I was thinking about, oh, Pluto entering Aquarius, this is a huge sort of transition. How does that translate in human design? And it was interesting to me that it was still in the same gate, still in gate 60, which in human design is the gate of, okay. Yeah, there's my parents who live about 90 minutes away saying that they just had the earthquake. Okay, breaking news, 4.7. Yeah, I think it was felt as far as New York. So literally live, guys, this is happening as I'm talking about earthquakes. But yeah, you'll see the notifications popping up there. Anyway, what was I saying? Oh yeah, so the the fact that Pluto's transition from Capricorn to Aquarius still stayed in gate 60, right, which is the gate of limitation. If we look at this, currently sitting in 60 line 6, and it's acceptance of limitation, right? Right now we're dealing with inflexibility, right? If we read this, the strict adherence to beliefs or rules that can be inflexible and harsh, causing emotional and mental strain, like a parent who imposes strict discipline on their child. So interesting to consider that. And then later in the video, we'll look forward to, in another week or so, we're going to get Pluto moving into the 41st gate, which will give us a different keynote, different theme. And again, it's just going to be kind of a tease, right? Because Pluto's going to ingress and then it's going to hit its retrograde period. It's going to move back into gate 60. It's eventually going to move back into Capricorn during the later half of 2024. And it won't be until at the end of the year and into 2025 when Pluto will move for good into Aquarius, and for good, or for the better part of 3 years, into the 41st gate of the Rave Mandala. And we'll be really into an interesting time, because the 41st is the start codon for the entire Rave Mandala, as it's associated with our DNA. So I'll probably do a separate video on that, really, because it's worthy of a deeper dive into the meaning and significance of that transit. I think it's going to be the beginning of a 3-year period here leading up to 2027, which is a very significant date within human design as well. So a lot of astrology and human design coming up in the transits here, which is why I think some of these videos are really helpful. But I'm going to jump back to the chart now, because I want to talk about the upcoming eclipse, which is significant. And I do have a chart specifically for the eclipse here. And here's what's very interesting. If we look at this eclipse taking place in Aries, and I've cast this chart, by the way, for Carbondale, Illinois, which is probably the closest town to that intersection that I showed you in the graphic earlier, where the two eclipse paths intersect, and in the heart of that very seismically active part of America. So it's occurring here at 19 degrees 24 minutes of Aries. The sun and the moon will be within 4 degrees of the north node, and this is what causes eclipses. Anytime that full or new moon occurs within 5 or 10 degrees of the nodal axis, that's when we get either solar or lunar eclipses. In this case, we're getting a solar eclipse where the moon will be between the Earth and the sun, as I sort of indicated with this chart here, right? The moon is going to come, we have to go forward here. I'll just show you exactly. If we go to April 8th, that's too far. Sorry, I'm not really good with this. We'll have the sun blocked out by the moon. And it's so fascinating, right? I mean, if you think about the scale of this, and this graphic isn't even to scale, but, that the moon will block out the entirety of the sun only at this certain time when this occurs on the ecliptic as it is. So, the geophysics of this, the astronomy of it is fascinating in and of itself. Not to mention all of the metaphysics of it. But this is what's happening, as I showed you earlier, the Earth over by itself practically on this side of the chart. And all of this activity occurring, in this part of the sky. And this, these kind of configurations are kind of rare. And this is the kind of thing that as astrologers going into 2020, we looked at what was happening with the Saturn-Pluto conjunction in Capricorn at that time, and like every planet was in Capricorn. Saturn-Pluto is a major conjunction of itself, but Mars was there, Venus was there, Jupiter was coming through. It was such a, as what's great about astrology is the predictive tool. We can look forward and say, I don't know, but this is something big. This feels big, right? And I think this is the kind of chart that, when we look at a year at a glance, when I looked at the charts for 2024, this was the period of time I was like, okay, this feels significant. And in the sign of Aries, and the other thing I want to point to is it's exactly conjunct Chiron, like to the degree and minute here, right? So this is really, really significant. That what we're getting is this massive, this perfect solar eclipse coincident with Chiron. So I want to talk a little bit about the symbolism of Chiron being in Aries, right? And this is a long transit. This is a 10-year transit on average where Chiron moves through Aries. And it's significant. I mean, it's personally significant for me because I was born with Chiron in Aries. And so Chiron has about a 50-year orbit. So, which is why we have something called the Chiron return. So at about age 50, we all experience Chiron returning to its point of origin where it was in our birth chart. So for many of my generation, if you were born between I think 1968 to about 1977, almost a decade there, you had Chiron in Aries. And so you are going through your Chiron return. For the earliest of us, it started in 2018 when Chiron moved into Aries. It's going to last until 2027. So we've got 3 more years of Chiron in Aries. But this transit and this eclipse really seems to highlight this theme of Chiron and Aries. So I thought we'd take a deeper look at it. And of course, Chiron is known as the wounded healer, right? This is the archetype. I associate it with Virgo. It's not necessarily so, but if you think about all the things that Virgo represents, Chiron seems to feel most at home. It's the natural healer of the zodiac. It's the shaman, the teacher, the healer. But if we think about all the things that Chiron represents, associated very much with health and well-being, with medicine, with sort of the homeopathic natural way of healing. You think of this holistic homeopathic modalities. And as we move into Aries, which is a sign of initiation. And in fact, you see that both of these have this initiative quality to it. Pioneering, right? Something bold and new, a new direction in health and healing. So it feels like, and I've talked about this with Chiron and Aries previously, but it feels like some new, the new medicine, if you will, is emerging, but always it's in battle with the old, right? And I feel like so much has been debated over, the coronavirus, the vaccines, medication, the big pharma, the opioid crisis. I think we are reaching a crisis moment in our healthcare system of those who will, follow the science for all of their medical guidance versus those who are much more, independent-minded and homeopathic, right? And I think this eclipse is symbolizing something very significant about our relationship to health and healing. And I think this is going to happen on an individual person-to-person basis, and it is something that is percolating in the collective. I think of things like alternative medicines. We think of, the decriminalizing of cannabis, the use of psychedelics in psychotherapy, plant-based medicines. I think there's this whole movement, and I agree that I don't think any plant should be illegal, right? This control over plants, and our sovereign right to our own psychological states, if you will. I think those things are being accented by this eclipse. So I'm looking for clues into the healthcare and the medical profession, breakthroughs. We're in a period of breakthrough. We'll talk about that with Uranus and Jupiter conjunction, which is one that's often associated with breakthroughs. Just realizing how crazy my hair is. I probably should have dragged a comb through that. But anyway, Chiron and Aries. So this is, being amplified by the eclipse. And if we think about Chiron in relation to the sun and the moon, because these are the energies of the eclipse, we get the moon's energy eclipsing or overshadowing the power of the sun, right? And if you think about the sun as representing our individuality, our self-expression, our life force being overshadowed by the moon's security needs and its self-reflection. Of course, the light of the moon is a reflection of the sun, right? As the famous Pink Floyd song reminds us, there is no dark side of the moon. As a matter of fact, it's all dark, right? All we're seeing is the light of the sun reflected off the moon. And of course, during an eclipse, this optical phenomenon becomes quite profound, right? So when we get a solar eclipse with the moon blocking out the sun, a lot of the past can come up. This need for security, tradition, projection, protection, looking backwards versus the sun's tendency to look forward, right? And here we have Chiron kind of sitting between the two. So are we reviving the old moon medicine, right? Which would be more traditional healing methods, the shamanic, right? The traditional, the holistic, sort of eclipsing the sun's sort of forward-thinking, futuristic, very much in the scientific vein. So this is another reason why I feel like this eclipse is bringing up these themes for us, right? The father versus the mother, right? And you think of science, the fathers of science, right? Versus the mothers of, say, the shamanic tradition, the traditional healing modalities. It's very interesting. And so something to just watch out for. And again, it's not just about this one day in April of 2024. Whenever we're dealing with the energy of eclipses, that reverberates all the way through the entire eclipse season. So whatever energies are being activated during this eclipse here in April, it's going to last all the way and won't really culminate until we get the next eclipses, which will occur in Libra season coming up later in the year. So think about this, 6-month window really, where we will be under the influence, if you will, of this eclipse. It's a longer lasting effect. And so all of these sort of archetypal constellations are going to be prevalent. So if you are intending any sort of ritual around the eclipse, wherever you are, setting an intention and bringing a greater awareness to your own sense of health and well-being. That's a very important theme of this eclipse. People who are dealing with lingering health issues, looking at alternative approaches to healing. There may be some issues with your relationships to your current healthcare system. Whether there's something administratively that takes place, whether there's new laws passed. I think there's going to be something significant taking place that's percolating, that this eclipse will either reveal. Often eclipses reveal something that is hidden, so you could have something like scandals, health-related scandals, something with healthcare, some scandal with, big pharma or the drug agencies, or the FDA and all of these things. My antenna go up when I see these kinds of configurations, just like my antenna go up when I'm looking at eclipses in terms of the potential for earthquakes. And literally we are in just sort of seems like an unprecedented seismic activity. Again, causation, correlated, for sure, right? This is what Jung called synchronicity, right? The acausal cause. And who knows, there could be mechanism that we just aren't aware of, right? It's just beyond the capacity of our scientific measuring capacity right now. Science is a religion unto itself, and don't forget that, right? It is the religion of our times, and it's hard to recognize it as such. But if you think about it, it has an origin story. It has a creation myth. It's known as the Big Bang. But what banged the Big Bang is a question that science still cannot answer, and many questions they can't answer. And that's not a diss on science. It's just, taking it at face value. And so a lot of scientific folks will dismiss things like astrology because it can't be proven, it can't be, falsified. And that's true. But I think we're starting to get a sense that that's a missing piece of the picture that science has cleaved out and said, we are not dealing with that. We are only dealing with matter. And sometimes the metaphysical just shows up in ways that are wonderful and wondrous and awe-inspiring in many ways, which is why I find it interesting. So anyway, think about Chiron. Think about your health as we approach this eclipse. It is going to be significant. Now, the other event that will happen, and like I said, this is a big week coming up for us, and as we can see, I'll just move forward here just to get the current clock, which is about 3 days. So, we'll get this, I can get it exact here a little bit later, at about that 19 degrees there, where we see this will be the eclipse on the 8th. We also have Mars and Saturn coming very close to their exact conjunction in Pisces, significant, and also Jupiter and Uranus coming close to their exact conjunction in Taurus. And this is the other sort of big, significant transit that I looked at in terms of what's going on for this year, right? This is I think about a 13-year cycle. So every 13 years or so, Jupiter catches up to Uranus again. So, and it's a cycle of great, anytime Jupiter comes into contact with another planet, it essentially just expands whatever it touches. So Jupiter's grand expansive capacity is now giving, exacerbating this Uranus and Taurus, which is another symbol of sudden earth events. Earthquakes are associated with Uranus and Taurus. Taurus is an earth sign. It is the fixed earth, right? The resistance to change and movement. And you get Uranus, the great shaker, coming in. It literally shakes the earth. So that, along with the eclipse, is something that is reason that I prefaced this video with this long prologue on these eclipse paths coinciding with the earthquake paths, and the fact that we've had a recent earthquake in Taiwan, the fact that we just had a 4+ here in New England and in the Northeast, where it's very little seismic activity. That doesn't happen very often. Something's afoot here, folks. This stuff, listen, this stuff works. I don't know how, but it does. It's the magic of astrology. But let's take a look at some of the archetypal themes we'll be dealing with Jupiter and Uranus together, right? This is Jupiter, as I said, it's expansive. It brings this giant energy and typically very optimistic, very hopeful, very high inspiration. Jupiter is the great benefic of the zodiac. So anytime we're dealing with a Jupiter a transit in conjunction with Uranus, it is going to amplify Uranian energies, which are, it's the embrace of the unknown. It's all about revolution and change. Unorthodox, can be chaotic, can cause upheaval. It's very sudden shifts and changes. And of course, Uranus is the modern ruler of Aquarius. So this Aquarian energy with Pluto in Aquarius, with Uranus conjoining Jupiter, it's just an electricity in the air right now, and a sense that some big change is on the horizon. Something massive can be constellated when these two planets get together. And this is one of the cycles that I've mentioned in the book many times, Cosmos and Psyche by Richard Tarnas, where he looked at the historical patterns of all of these transits, and with Jupiter and Uranus, oftentimes associated with major scientific breakthroughs, right? Uranus is that sort of very progressive, scientific, genius-like quality, right? And when Jupiter and Uranus conjunct, we can have something very big scientifically. There's speculation that we've got artificial general intelligence under the hood that someone's not telling us about. It could be something medical. It could be technological. Also, let's just look at some of the potentials of this combination, right? We think about sort of a positive versus negative, because remember, all of these configurations have a light and a dark side. There's a shadow side to all of this, right? So dramatic breakthroughs, quantum leaps, rebirth and awakening, surprise resolutions. Wouldn't that be wonderful? And considering some of our geopolitical quagmires we're in. Collective epiphanies, right? This great collective aha moments. These are all characteristic of this conjunction. On the negative side, you can have manic and impulsive excess, right? Hubris and overweening pride, get-rich-quick schemes, right? Unbridled eccentricity, irresponsible rebellion. So, and usually both sides of the coin tend to manifest at once. But what I am always trying to do is arm you with the information and the insight and the awareness of these potentials, so that you can steer yourself, navigate towards the manifestation of these energies. Work with this energy in a way that makes you aware of the negative sides and moves you from the shadow to the light. This and that, right? I mean, if you look at this list, would you rather have a dramatic breakthrough, or would you rather suffer from a manic impulsive excess? It's pretty clear. The other thing to consider is that this is taking place in the sign of Taurus. So where would these breakthroughs or eccentricities or get-rich-quick schemes occur? In the sign of Taurus, fixed Earth, which is really all about the material world, right? When we talk about Taurus, we're talking about Venus, we're talking about value, we are talking about money. And we are talking about the earth. We are talking about the environment. So where will the big breakthroughs come, right? Well, maybe in those Taurus-ruled areas. Food, money, wealth, value, environmental issues, sexuality, reproductive issues. Taurus rules procreation, the artistic. So think about all of the potential that could be constellated. So again, with the Chiron thing as well as this Taurus factor, right? I'm looking at things like reproductive rights, fertility. It's so interesting now that we're getting, is it Ozempic? Is that the name of the weight loss drug that seems to be having a great effect on fertility? They're not sure what the mechanism is. Pretty surprising where we're getting all these Ozempic babies and Ozempic pregnancies. In vitro fertilization, the battle over, reproductive rights within states and the federal government. I just read that the U.S. government now is giving benefits up to $25,000 a year for fertility medicine for all federal employees. The U.S. government is the biggest employer in the country, so that's a very interesting thing to consider. So all of the nexus between all of these various points is interesting to examine and consider. So as we look at this next week to 10 days, you know, we've got a lot of astrological weather coming our way. So, you know, I wanted to come on and just do a quick video. None of my videos are ever quick, but at least that'll give you a little heads up for some of the things that you can look out for in the coming days and weeks. And obviously, as I said, this eclipse setting us up for an entire eclipse season. The reverberation of these major transits is going to be felt for months. So, you know, be acutely aware of what's going on in you, within your body, within your family, your community, and in the world. You know, look at what's going on in the global transits and see if you can integrate some of this information in a way that is positive, proactive, helpful. I know I'll be looking out and looking to you know, start a new health routine, really begin a better awareness of my own health and my own healing, physically, emotionally, you know, psychologically, spiritually, right? This is a time of an opportunity to really heal your wounds. Also, it could be really, you know, painful if you're not going through this process with awareness. Sometimes an eclipse like this could hit someone and really, you know, have a health scare. You have a setback. You can have all kinds of problems associated with that. So, you know, the awareness is key, and that's one of the things I've always tried to share on this channel, the reason I do these videos. So I hope that helps. I hope you found some guidance, some good information there. As always, I hope you'll like and subscribe so that we can grow this channel and get this information into more hearts and minds, if you will. So if you're going to be in the eclipse path, you're going to check it out. Be safe, be careful, enjoy it. Make sure you use the protective eyewear. Yeah, until next time, Satnam.